As a disclaimer, I don't really watch Nick Fuentes because I feel like I had the same experience like a lot of people. Seeing a couple of clips, some of them really outrageous, maybe seeing like an interview here and there, but I don't know. Everybody just kind of dismisses him as bad white man, bad Nazi. Which maybe could be true, I don't know, I guess we'll find out now. And I have like another few takes, but I think Mentis might actually bring that up so I can expand on that a bit later.
There are a lot of videos out there that are talking about the Groypers and pretending to understand them that are painfully milquetoast and clearly don't know what they're talking about, especially legacy media. In fact, let's start with that, going over a brief explanation of just who the Groypers are, because much of what legacy media has had to say about the Groypers is...
My take is, I think the appeal is like there's somebody finally saying it in a way, you know what I mean? Like not necessarily the Jew and Nazi stuff, but like, you know, the disenfranchised young man aspect of it. Because if you're a young white man, you can just see how the deck is stacked against you in a way. Nobody believes you, nobody like takes your input serious, while you look around and see all the DEI and all the women that being like instantly believed or like, you know, clapped on, like in not like negatively, but like in applause. But when you try to like bring in some input or like, I don't know, I have an idea or whatever, you're being kind of waved off as like, what do you know? You're just a white man.
Is extremely poor in terms of factual quality, partially because Groyper politics are in extreme opposition to what is considered acceptable in mainstream discourse. But also, a large part of it, I suspect, is just due to genuine inability of those inside the normie box to comprehend those who are too far outside that box. This is because the origins of the Groypers actually has absolutely nothing to do with Nick Fuentes. In fact, Nick Fuentes is really largely irrelevant to the movement of the Groypers in general. He just happens to be the current flag bearer. Rather, their true origins are deeply rooted in image board culture. Things like 4chan, 7chan, Infinity Chan, Lane Chan, All Chan, dozens of other chans we don't talk about Chan. Let's be honest, most of them are...
It also kind of supports my idea of what the movement kind of is, because I feel like a lot of it is, at least in the beginning, it's like coming from a place that is actually understanding and has like merit, but then it kind of camouflages itself with sarcasm and jokes, and that's kind of like where the problem comes in, I think, but I think he's gonna mention it later, so I'll expand on that in a bit.
Kinda dead anyways, etc, etc. Which, of course, gives us the first hint as to why corporate journalists are just completely incapable of understanding them. Image board culture is notoriously anti-normie, and yet corporate media almost exclusively employs said normies. So it really doesn't come as a shock then as to why so many...
It's really hard to understand 4chan. It's like you need several layers of like, to understand several layers of like sarcasm and the inside jokes and like references and stuff like that.
The journalists, when they try to write about the Groypers, seem to those of us who do understand the Groypers that they're in a constant state of severe confusion. It's just too far outside their reality for them to grasp. It's not just because the Groypers have some really radical political views, but rather a good analogy for it is that they just come from a completely different culture, of a completely different country altogether. I know this very well as someone who also has similar...
Also, just like the medium itself is like completely different, right? Because on 4chan, most of the people probably just hang out there for hours, thinking, spitballing, memeing, making jokes. While if you're trying to go to legacy media, it's like a 3-minute segment on a 24-hour freaking broadcast. And trying to boil it down into 3 minutes is like kind of impossible.
Origins, being a bit of a professional meme-smith, anonymous shite poster back in the early 2000s myself.
Damn.
And so I'm uniquely aware of how darn near impossible it is for some CNN sorority journalist who has spent their entire life in a tutorial difficulty bubble to comprehend even 1% of the multiple layers of irony needed.
Damn, legacy media playing checkers and 4chan is playing chess.
To truly get it and truly grasp image board culture. And to be honest, I don't think they'll ever get it. I don't think they can get it. I don't think it's cognitively possible for their brains to ever comprehend it. The rabbit hole is just too deep for them. But it doesn't matter because the number of red pills they would have to take to even begin entering that rabbit hole are too many for them. It would just completely crush their minds to oblivion. But that's just beating around the bush. So who are the Groypers, really?
Who are they?
Because the origins are rooted in image board culture, which is rooted in anonymous, Groypers aren't really a standard organization in the way you would think of it. So it's more of an ideology and a political movement. They are mostly a group of far authoritarian, loosely right-wing, mostly men under the age of 40 who have beliefs that include ultra-ethno-nationalism, America first, right-wing cultural beliefs, Christian nationalism, although they're not quite necessarily as serious on that as some people believe, going on expeditions to find Hyperborea, the JQ, yeah, we'll get to that one later, but also, strangely enough, center-left economic beliefs. Yeah, on that last one, we'll also get to that one later. For now, here's just more about who they are and where they come from. Image boards and image board culture comes from something that is...
I feel like it has like somewhat of a comeback, right? A lot of people go further to the right these days, which is just, I think it's just like an attempt to correct the broken system in a way. But that can like backfire real fast.
Has existed for a little over 2 decades. They allow anyone to anonymously post just about anything so long as it wasn't illegal without the need to register, and so discussions on image boards are notorious for having extremely low moderation and thus very high free speech. This creates a form of discussion that much of the boomer generation and Generation X are completely unused to, because in the normie sphere, a lot of political...
Especially like in the last 5 to 10 years, right? If you said something that wasn't like in the mainstream opinion, then there was a chance you're gonna get canceled or like lose your job, or I don't know, like get thrown out of your apartment and stuff like that.
And ideological and philosophical discussions are largely focused on who is saying what, as opposed to what is being said. When a boomer is watching their primetime TV news on their normie box, a lot of times they will view opinions being said as true.
Yeah, like in legacy media, it's more about like who you are. They invite celebrities, politicians, experts, you know, experts. But like before 4chan, anyone can have a good argument, basically, yeah? Makes sense.
Based on the anchor that is saying them. And so a lot of the older generations, they're just kind of used to accepting that as valid truth. Famous guy in the normie box said it, therefore it is true. A rather unfortunate but effectively
it wasn't told VTV, it must mean it's true.
Accurate explanation of boomer lib epistemology. That's pretty much how they get their knowledge. However, image board culture completely flips it on its head. Everyone's anonymous. Who you are doesn't matter. There's no such thing as...
Plus, everybody on the internet is an expert. Especially on 4chan, I think.
Social reputation here. The discussion is now focused entirely on what is being said. And so normal social shaming tactics in these kinds of discussions don't work anymore. For example, you can't just call somebody a racist in these boards and then just automatically be considered correct. The type of moralizing and shaming...
Your opinion invalid because Nazi.
...arguments and association fallacies that are popular on legacy media, they're just not effective here. And so the normal boomerality tactics of finger-wagging your way to victory in any kind of debate, well, it just doesn't work here. And because of this, the most popular...
Also, I feel like it's not only that. I feel like people are kind of fed up with it as well, right? Because it's been happening for so long now. People just kind of lost the ability to care about it. It's like, fine, I guess I am. Fuck you then.
Ideologies on these image boards ended up being ideologies, interestingly enough, that were completely different from the establishment. Because without those moralizing propaganda techniques, establishment opinions quickly reveal themselves to be completely...
I support the current thing.
Indefensible. In fact, the general consensus in places like the old /news or /poll or other places where politics and philosophy were discussed, even /b sometimes, or heck, if you're a true old friend, you may remember back when we were talking about this stuff on /a, we quickly reached a sort of conscious consensus that much of what had been sold as true by the boomer establishment was in fact nothing but a bunch of nonsensical, hypocritical, self-contradictory, grade A BS. And so instead what you found on these image boards, again, mostly 4chan, but also other image boards, were first ideologies like my own, which is basically right-wing libertarianism in support of Ron Paul, who was in fact the first preferred candidate of 4chan about 15 years ago. And there's a few other ideas, political and philosophical, that gained some traction within image board culture that normally wouldn't in the mainstream media, but let's just skip to the Groypers. Because another very big one that especially /poll, of course, is known for is, again, ultra far-right ethno-nationalism, to the point of having several threads per day just outright praising Adolf Hitler, accompanied with the usual things such as Holocaust.
I think most of it is sarcastic and like intended as jokes, but here comes the problem. I feel like if you're shrouding your movement or your ideas with sarcasm and jokes, you're gonna reach a point, especially with Nick Fuentes, who's like kind of becoming popular, right? And like with any community, there's gonna be a point where just fucking weirdos and insane people gonna join. you know, the jokes you make, the fun little sarcastic quips with like, yeah, I love that, I love Hitler, great, amazing. It's like, that's just gonna turn into like a subset of people in your community that actually believe it. And that, I feel like, is kind of detrimental to the Nick Fuentes movement. Or maybe I'm wrong. Maybe he actually does like him. I don't know.
Cost denial, blaming everything on the Jews. You know, again, stuff that's generally considered just completely inconceivable and totally unacceptable within the channels of mainstream discourse. And me personally, I'm definitely not a member of this ideology. In fact, I consider it just as bad in many ways as communism. And if you've seen my other videos on my channel, you probably have a pretty good idea of what I think of communism. However, I do completely understand why this ideology ended up becoming popular in this kind of environment. The thing is, the Groypers are selling a solution to a real problem. A flawed solution, but at least they acknowledge the problem. And that problem is that the equality...
It's like everybody tells you, you're a white young man, you have no opinion. And they don't think so. So that's naturally like why people are attracted to it, right? Because finally there's somebody who's like actually acknowledging you and basically affirming your belief that everything is against you in a way.
That has been kind of sold to the boomers through the civil rights era has failed. And because it has failed, it is only able to kind of limp along by hoisting itself up through a bunch of various ideological contradictions. And just about everybody in legacy media is either just ignoring this problem altogether, or they're actually pretending that it's a good thing, despite the fact that it is neither culturally nor economically sustainable. And so thus, before going into what the Groypers get wrong and why they get it wrong, we must first look at what they get correct and how politics in the West ended up in this sorry state. The first thing the Groypers get correct is that young men in the West, especially if you're a young white man, but pretty much all young men, have every right to be absolutely infuriated at the current establishment. And to be honest, if you're a young woman, you should actually be infuriated.
It's so annoying when you talk to a boomer and they're like, just go outside and go into a company and get a job. What are you doing? Well, maybe that would have worked like 40 years ago, but now...
Infuriated at it too, because what I'm about to talk about here negatively affects the ladies just as much, just indirectly. So if you're a woman born after 1980, you've probably wondered why it seems like so many men your age have just kind of given up and are completely disconnected and seemingly disengaged from the social system.
There's like a psychology effect to this. It's like if you lose more than 60 or 70% of time, I think, then you just kind of like stop playing the game. And I feel like that's kind of what's happening right now. Like, people don't see a reasonable chance of winning anymore. So why even, like, attempt to join the game, basically?
And the answer is because that system actively hates them. The millennial and Gen Z white male experience is growing up being constantly held collectively guilty and blamed for the alleged sins of the past you had no hand in, while also being told that you still benefit from all of those things, despite the fact that the power dynamics behind them were abolished after World War II and actually flipped during the civil rights.
Yikes. There's this like comic here. This is kind of like what my, in quotations, problem is with it. As I mentioned earlier, there's gonna be a subset of people that are just so fed up, they like try to counter-correct it too much in a way. And plus, there's probably a couple of unhinged people that just believe the anti-Jew stuff.
Sarah, this also comes with the experience of being constantly...
Which is also understandable to some extent, because, like, for example, Trump ran on, like, immigration policies and America first. So why the fuck are we like so hung up on like Israel, the Middle East, and all that other crap?
It's kind of weird. A good simple example of this is being told you have privilege through greater access to things like respect and education, when in reality, being a young white male in the age of white guilt means you get discriminated against in college admissions and are constantly being told by the leftist media about what a shitlord you are for being who you are. And it really needs to be stressed how surreal this is and how obviously fraudulent it should appear to any rational person.
It just doesn't make sense either.
You realize
it's like they constantly complain about racism, but then they make it harder for a certain group of people because of their skin color. It's like nonsensical.
Is that this message is completely self-contradictory. The establishment is essentially berating you and hating you for controlling the establishment. But wait, the very fact that they hate you is proof that you don't control the establishment. And indeed, if you look into things like Curtis Yarvin's analysis of academia and media, which he calls in The Cathedral, said establishment reveals that it's created various power structures and bureaucracies that is overwhelmingly leftist, which has been proven to have an anti-white bias. The TLDR of it is the result is you, also as a young white dude, you grow up being the only population group where it is considered politically correct to hate you for who you are, and you're constantly being told that you have the privilege of not being hated for who you are by the very people who are controlling the system and clearly hating you for who.
This is also like really dangerous, by the way. If you tell somebody they're evil all the time, at some point they're gonna snap and be like, oh, I'm evil? Fine, fuck it, I am evil. And that's that's a recipe for disaster at some point.
You are. It's insane. It's actually completely bonkers. There was a recent article on Compact that kind of highlights the insanity. The Lost Generation from Jacob Savage did a relatively large deep dive into the effects of DEI being institutionalized. The TLDR of it is that employers have been actively discriminating against young white men for quite a long time now, while the cathedral blatantly lied through their teeth claiming that it wasn't happening, even though it very obviously.
You just imagine this the other way around. Imagine there's like the establishment basically saying, okay, we are not hiring black people because there's white people in the freaking application system. Sure, they're like a little bit worse than you, but we're gonna hire them instead because we have to. We have to fill the quota, bro.
Was. And so it comes as no real shocker then that one of the memes you might have found on these image boards back in the day was this one. Congratulations, young white males. With the relatively successful destruction of the patriarchy in your generation and the homogenization of gender roles, you are now officially of no value to society.
Bro.
But wait, it gets better. Given that your fathers and grandfathers still benefit from their patriarchally given gifts, such as the ability to act like actual men in their social construct without repercussion, they won't have any freaking idea why you're such a dumb little screw up because they exist in an alternative reality where they still freaking matter. Bonus gifts. Racism perpetuated by your fathers and grandfathers before you is still within the very real living memory of society, and you get to inherit the title of being utter freaking scum by merit of your gender/race without having actually participated in the evils they committed. Best of all, despite statistically being the most unemployed/hopeless bracket in the entire Western world right now, you're apparently super freaking entitled even though your gender role and racial identity have literally been burned to the ground. But guess what? No one freaking cares, and no one will care. Your parents, society, and women in particular cannot fathom how perpetually effed your role in the world is, and have no effing clue what could possibly be motivating you to stay inside and play freaking video games all day.
Yeah. I mean, I think it makes sense if like a lot of young men share this mindset, which is like kind of based in reality, because it is just happening. It is happening. If you're like a young man, you kind of realize this is happening. And it makes sense that like a lot of people kind of try to find somebody who's like seeing it too in a way, right? Because it's like clearly in front of you and you point it out and nobody believes you. So there's finally a guy like Nick Fuentes, for example, that like says it as well. And then you're like, oh my God, finally. Finally, there's somebody who says it.
Another thing that the Groypers are correct about is that the Holy Church of Equality has...
This is also a reason why freaking, what was it, Andrew Tate? Andrew Tate was like so popular as well, right? Because he also said, the Matrix. The Matrix is against you. They want to turn you into sheep. You have to work out. It's basically the same mentality. It's like, finally somebody says that like things are bad.
A very large lie at the heart of it, which shows that one big problem with the global establishment is that they don't actually believe in the equality stuff that they're preaching, because a big part of their equality narrative is backed by one of the most insane fallacies to ever exist, which is a double standards fallacy that can be known as the great global grift of identity politics for we and not for thee. This is best summarized by this infamous post from Christopher Langan, where he makes the argument that identity politics can only be justified if everyone of every ethnicity is entitled to participate, and how the global order's refusal to acknowledge...
It's almost like it's more equal if you don't go for identity groups or like tribalism. If you treat everybody as an individual, it's more equal that way.
Acknowledge this problem may perhaps be one of the biggest pieces of evidence of their intellectual fraudulence. A big one that stands out, as Chris Langan wrote, once we cease to treat individuals as individuals per se, thus allowing members of their respective groups to assert their ethnic, cultural, or religious identities against their quote-unquote oppressors, their group properties and statistics are automatically open to scrutiny.
Also, there's like a weird like sub-undertone in this where like if you don't try to like join or participate in the ethnic, cultural, or religious group, then you're being shunned as well, right? even though you used to be part of it, it's like makes no sense as well.
Comparative analysis. This is something that the Church of Equality has repeatedly refused to do, decreeing by holy order that collectivist scrutiny is only valid under the politically correct context that it is only white people who are to be collectively blamed for things, while against other ethnicities this is deemed unacceptable. And one thing I've personally noticed that's kind of interesting that I'd like to add to Christopher Langan's explanation here is that one of the most telling parts is that the Church of Equality's answer to this, the reasoning they use to justify it, is entirely circular. For example, if you were to point out this inconsistency to a random pew warmer of the cult of woke and ask them how it is justified,
intolerant of intolerance.
Why is it only white?
I mean, that makes sense though. You kind of there's like a suicidal empathy though, right?
Are to be held to the standards of collectivist ethno-guilt, they will almost always go on to list all of the things that they view white people as collectively guilty for. Ma colonialism, ma Trail of Tears, ma Jim Crow, ma slavery. They'll go on to list all of these things that the whites have allegedly used to oppress everybody else for thousands of years. Which of course is completely ridiculous because that's circular reasoning. They're just using collectivist ethno-guilt in order to justify using collectivist ethno-guilt.
Yeah.
That's just begging.
Also, shouldn't there be like some kind of timer on that? Shouldn't there be a cooldown at some point? It's like, I don't think most of black people in America these days had any experience in being a slave, just as well as any Jew in America had any experience of like partaking in the Holocaust. Maybe your grandparents, maybe your grandparents or something, and you kind of like know the stories or like, you know, the history of it, but you personally, as a 20, 30, 40-year-old, don't have anything related to that at all.
The question, there's no actual starting point to their reasoning. And yet, despite this argument being demonstrably nonsensical, it's also scarily common. And so thus, academia is forced to contort itself in these kind of weird mental gymnastics and crazy narratives to further justify their narrative, like claiming unironically that, oh, it's only racist when white people do it. Only white people can be racist. It's just so obviously on its face.
Which sounds racist. Imagine any other ethnic group in that sentence and it'd be immediately obvious it's racist.
Dumb. And Groypers are one of the few groups that are actually willing to talk about this. For instance, in this post from Nick Fuentes, tribalism for Jews, blacks, and Indians, but universal principles for white people. And while Fuentes is wrong about a lot of things, on this one particular subject, he and the Groypers are correct. The cathedral seems to think that they can engage in this finger wagging against the younger white generations whenever it comes to them having a collective identity, but then praises that kind of identity politics for every other group. And very few people are talking about just how completely jacked of a double standard that is. Which brings me to another thing the Groypers get correct, which is the concept of per capita. One of the things that people engaged in that type of circular argument I just mentioned will go ahead with their white people bad rhetoric, is they'll point out that, oh, white men commit more crimes, therefore white people collectively guilty. Except it's not actually true when you consider per capita. This is probably the fastest way to detect.
That's why they never want to talk about per capita. That's why they like always play dumb, pretend they don't understand it. Like, what do you mean percentages? What?
If someone has zero mathematical reasoning skills. Ask them to imagine two buckets.
No.
One bucket.
My new opinion on this is they all fucking understand. They just don't want to admit to it. Because how can you not understand it? If you take like 5 minutes to look at it, you understand. But you can't admit to it because that means you've lost the argument.
Bucket has 20 apples in it and 2 of them are poisonous, and the other bucket has 1,000 grapes in it and 20 of them are poisonous. If you had to choose between eating 1 grape or 1 apple from their respective bucket,
I eat all 10 apples.
Which bucket would you choose? If someone says that they'd rather eat an apple from the apple bucket because 2 is a lower number than 20, you are talking to someone who cannot be saved. Just straight up. Do not bother.
No, I don't. Is there people like that though? I don't know. I mean, I guess it makes sense. There are really stupid people. Especially like nowadays. I feel like more people are more stupid today than like, I don't know, 10, 20 years ago.
Arguing with them, do not bother trying to reason with them. Just wipe your hands of the conversation, walk away, save yourself some frustration. Another thing the Groypers get correct is that the geopolitical establishment is fundamentally corrupt to the core. And this goes far beyond just the identity politics issue.
That's what I mean. Like a lot of points they're making, it's not like even very political. It's just like pointing it out and being like, Yeah, I see it too, guys. That's the whole appeal of it.
Mentioned earlier. They are corrupt to the core, period. For instance, they understand specifically in the United States that both the Republicans and the Democrats are corrupt. They don't exactly get the reason why correct, a bit more on that later, but for the most part, Groypers are correct in recognizing that political parties, pretty much all of them, are terrible. Every single
This is like slowly gonna make me into a Groyper one. Oh, that might age really poorly in like 5 or 10 minutes, maybe.
Western democracy can be summarized as just voting for the lesser evil. And this is an issue I've kind of gone over before in an old video I did on boomer conservatism. To summarize it, the Republican Party and also a lot of other so-called conservative parties in other Western democracies like Canada and the UK, etc., well, they don't really conserve anything. Instead, they've largely just been, as many have put it, progressives driving the speed limit. They don't actually do anything to dismantle far-left bureaucratic control that generally tends to happen whenever the more left-leaning parties are in power. Instead, whenever they're in power, they just kind of sit there and twiddle their thumbs and pass billions of dollars of spending packages for foreign countries. And
dude, it was crazy. I feel like he did more. I mean, again, not necessarily like good things, or like I don't really agree with some of the things he does, but like I feel like he's the first president in a while that's actually doing shit. Like executive orders en masse is like freaking bunch of things. Every week there's something happening with him.
So when you go to the voting booth in Western democracies these days, you're really just either voting for progressives and whatever they want, or you're voting for what the progressives wanted 20 or 30 years ago, aka which is what the Republican Party will do. The result of this is that if you're a millennial or a Gen Z...
Oh, I've seen so many clips. Like 10, 15 years ago or something, Hillary Clinton basically said the same talking points. Obama said the same talking points as Trump today. But Trump is a Nazi now. It's kind of weird. It's weird how much they flip-flop. If you actually look at politicians, they flip-flop so fucking much. Even Trump did this. He wanted to be like a Democrat as well. And then he flip-flopped to Republicans. I don't know.
The feeling when it comes to the...
It's almost like it doesn't matter what they do or say. It's just a popularity contest.
Voting booth is that we don't really have a choice. And then on the side of the more left-leaning parties, the Groypers are for the most part correct that they have been using immigration as a way to just increase their voter base. At least within the Democratic Party of the United States, the basic grift strategy that they have undertaken is to just import people from the third world, get them hooked on welfare, offer more welfare, and thus they earn votes.
Almost sounds like slaves with extra steps.
And while Groypers do tend to kind of underestimate just how bad the welfare problem is, they are at least correct in recognizing that voter base replacement is a strategy of the current establishment to maintain their power. Or a TLDR way to put it is that the Groypers are effectively correct in their assessment that Western democracies are currently largely under the control of a bunch of backstabbing corrupt traitors. And thus they are one of the few political factions that is willing to meaningfully...
That's why I always say, put him in jail. It's so wild to me that like nobody has been persecuted yet. The Epstein files came out and nothing happened. What? Minnesota fraud came out, nothing happening. What? Can we like expedite this a little bit? Make people go to jail faster.
Criticize that establishment by recognizing the need to attack that establishment even from your own side of the political compass, and actually call out the military-industrial complex along with the system that perpetuates it. So then, if the Groyper...
It's not about the points anymore. I think that's like another appeal, like especially from earlier when 4chan is basically discussing ideas while legacy media and politicians are more about tribalism, which means they can't try to infight, at least in the political system, like the left totally infights all the time, but at least in the political voting aspect of it, like in the House and stuff, they usually stick together no matter what. There's like one or two like outliers sometimes, but generally speaking, they all vote for the same shit, even if it's actually bad.
Correct about the West state of fallen, but as you might recall earlier in the video, I mentioned they offer a flawed solution to the problem. What exactly are those flaws? Well, now we can finally talk about what it is the Groypers get wrong and why they get them wrong. The first flaw is that Groypers go very, very hard on the JQ, also known as the Jewish question. In a nutshell, the JQ is really just the tendency to blame most of the world's problems on the Jews, alongside often thinking that Jews secretly control much more of the entire world than what they let on. And when it comes to to explaining why the JQ is incorrect, I often see a really big problem coming from the establishment, which is that they'll just kind of brush it off and label those who are JQers.
This is the main point, I think. It's like, I understand how it might have started with Nick Fuentes, or like, you know, at 4chan, I guess. Like, basically it says it in the name itself, the Jewish question, right? Like, why is it? Why is it that so many are involved? Why is it that we like constantly pander to it? It's like, it is weird. And since we don't really know the answer to that, it becomes kind of like a conspiracy theory, which it kind of is. But like, where is it going? And I think it might have started out as a like genuine like, hey, what is going on here kind of question. But then, because they shrouded so much in sarcasm and jokes, it kind of becomes like an actual aspect of the movement, especially later on if it becomes more popular, like it kind of is now, where you get a subcategory of like those lunatics in every community. Every community has lunatics. But especially here, it's like the people that actually hate the Jews and want, like, they're like that the priority of the movement in a way. And if you look onto it from the outside in, it looks like everybody has that opinion because a couple of people who are very fanatic about it scream a lot about it. Plus, the rest of them still kind of assume it's just like, you know, sarcasm and jokes, and sure, there's a genuine question beneath it, but we're joking about it, haha, Hitler, stuff like that, you know. And I don't know, it's kind of might backfire soon.
As, oh, they're anti-Semitic, and therefore they're wrong. And the thing is, as I mentioned earlier, that doesn't really work anymore. The whole finger wagging and shaming and saying, oh, you're a racist, you're a no good, very bad, mean person.
I mean, what's the worst that could happen? You're a young white man or something, everybody calls you a Nazi and fascist and freaking patriarchy and stuff, and then you're like, no, I'm not, no, I'm not, no, I'm not. And then at some point you're just like, well, if I am, then I guess I am. Who cares anymore? I can say no all the time, but you're still gonna believe it. So at this point, I'm just gonna say yes.
And bigot, it just doesn't work on the Groypers. So what I'm gonna do instead is I'm gonna forget all that. Let's just calmly explain from a statistical and evidence-based standpoint why the JQ is a kind of dumb thing to believe. Why you shouldn't be blaming the Jews for everything.
My guess is it's because of nepotism, right? If you're a big, powerful, rich person, you're gonna give high positions and money to people that you trust and that you like, aka your family and friends. And since some of them are Jewish, I guess some of them have Jewish friends and family members, so they all get a slice of the cake.
There's a lot of reasons why the JQ is wrong, and yes, there is the moral aspect of it's just kind of wrong from an ethics standpoint to hold people collectively guilty for alleged crimes of the group, but there's many other issues.
Doesn't make sense.
The first problem is that most Jews, at least in the United States, are not meaningfully different than non-Jewish white liberals, especially amongst elites. For example, a common silly meme you might see in right-wing spaces that accept the JQ online.
Actually, I just realized they're basically doing the same thing to others as they complain about themselves. Everybody calls us bad and evil, and then they turn around and say everything is bad and evil about Jews. Like, what? Oh no, they're turning into leftists. Oh no.
As they will link to some journalist article that has some incredibly dumb trash of opinion, often spouting the id pull for we but not for thee contradiction I mentioned earlier, and they'll just point to the coincidence that, oh look, it was written by...
You know what, I should maybe just let him talk. He explains everything right after me. Even though I'm not that versed in it, it's crazy.
A Jew. But the problem is you're just as likely to find this in upper middle class white liberal areas. And these articles are actually written by non-Jewish white elites more than they're written by Jews. Sure, there's a disproportionate amount of Jews writing these things, but really it's the ideology, not so much some unique problem with the Jews. In fact, most Jews actually self-identify as white. And so when you see stuff like this, it's actually more accurate to say that white people in the elite class have a kind of self-ethnic hate.
Wait. Is it the... Is that a saying? What? Oh, I guess a Jew is like also like a race, right? Bro, I don't care about the Jews at all. Is that weird? Is that a hot take? Like, oh my god, just let them do their thing. Let's focus on America or something.
Hatred problem. They feel guilty for having what they consider to be white privilege, and they believe that by becoming a progressive trash lib, they can absolve themselves of that guilt. And it's not something at all that can be uniquely blamed on Jews. For example, a Pew Research poll back in 2020 showed that the net Jewish is about 50% liberal, 32% moderate, and 16% conservative. And interestingly enough, this also shows something that you normally wouldn't expect if you just listen to JQers, which is that it's the Jews who are less religious who are actually more liberal. And Orthodox Jews are actually 60% conservative, so the majority of Orthodox Jews actually lean kind of right. And in terms of finances, most Jewish households earn less than 150K, with the most standard being somewhere between 50 to 150K. Nearly half of all Jews earn somewhere around that. And
yeah, I mean, it's not all the Jews. It's probably what I mentioned earlier. It's basically nepotism. You, your friends and your family and their friends and families probably get like, they get an easier time getting into those places or whatever.
The thing is, if we compare this to non-religious whites, we kind of see similar numbers. Another Pew Research study around 2024 showed very similar things. Non-religious.
I think it's maybe more akin to the elites than actual Jews. It just happens to be that some of them might be Jewish or something.
Just whites favor the Democrats in a 28 to 68 split, or low religiousness as they put it. And the thing is, atheists in general tend to have similar economic splits. An additional study from 2023 found that atheist households, well, the vast majority of them are also earning over 50K or more. And if you look at elite universities, you'll find that a lot of non-Jewish white elites have a similar mentality and similar ideology. They tend to be less religious, more liberal leaning, and of course they generally will be earning more money. Are you really finding these coincidences in the Jews here? Or really, are these coincidences just patterns that you would expect to find as the logical conclusion of Eurocentric atheism? Because when you control for that, when you look at Orthodox Jews, the Jews who actually practice Judaism, these claims tend to go away. So it would seem that what JQers are looking at is actually just white liberal atheism. And this immediately calls into question one of the basic assumptions of the JQ. If these numbers were totally different, if we saw Jews earning something like 90% of Jews drastically out-earning everybody else for no apparent reason, then maybe the JQ could start shaking a stick. But the problem is most Jews, your average Jewish household, shows similar patterns of every other American.
I also don't think it's like a like a giant conspiracy. I think it's pretty simple. It's probably nepotism and stuff like that.
American household. The majority of Jews are living in a middle-class home in a middle-class family, and they have a variety of views rather than being a monolith of views, and they haven't actually done anything wrong. And so this isn't just a Nailath fallacy. The vast majority of Jews are just regular people. And this is why it's kind of dumb to be anti-Semitic. It's not just sort of a, oh, well, it's mean to be anti-Semitic thing. It just doesn't really make much sense. It's not like all of the Jews are wielding...
What? Are you saying it's illogical instead of immoral? Oh my god. I mean, he's correct though. It just doesn't make sense at the same time. Unless... Never mind, I'm not going to finish that sentence. I don't want to be banned.
Some kind of secret power so that they're all living in giant golden palaces while everybody else starves. That's not how the world works. That's not what's going on at all in any way. And if you ever dig deep into this, it's pretty much the same thing all the way down. If you look at white liberal elites who are non-religious, who are not Jewish, and then you compare them to Jews, they show very, very similar numbers. Another issue with the JQ is just general statistical reasoning errors like the fallacy of averages and just the general issues of low sample size. Because Jews, at least in the United States, have just about always made up less than 3% of Americans. And so when you have really low sample sizes, you can end up saying some really weird stuff like, oh, Jews are 600% overrepresented in X. But if there's not that many of them, then it really could just be an issue of one of them blowing the average. So for example, JQers will point to things like Jewish overrepresentation in political donors, overrepresentation in Congress, large presence in the corporate media, and large presence in academia. And yes, it is true, Jews...
This is all... Like, those are all areas of nepotism. Movies, politicians, freaking the board meeting of some place, or like companies and stuff. This is all nepotism. If you ask your dad or something, hey, give me a job, and he happens to be Jew, then surprise, you gonna be in the company too, and then there's like 2 Jewish people suddenly.
Have a disproportionate representation in all of these things. But it doesn't really imply what JQers think it implies. And if you recall what I said earlier about Jewish household income and percentage of Jewish population, the reason why will become kind of obvious to you. If again, most Jews are just random, ordinary, regular Americans and aren't actually making that much more money than average, and are almost just virtually identical to white liberal elites who are non-religious, well, it's actually just financially not possible for all of the Jews to be involved in all of the donations. It is true that an absolutely insane amount of donations that both the Democrats and the Republicans are receiving is coming from a Jewish source. Again, it's definitely disproportionately Jewish, you can't deny that. However, that's mostly just coming from random Jewish individuals who are very, very rich, giving very large donations. And that just kind of breaks the average. In truth, most Jewish donations are...
It's weird how, like, somebody who's rich and powerful can just change things with money, huh?
You're just random Jewish middle American family donating $15 to their local election or something. So this isn't a Nailath fallacy I'm making again here. I'm not saying, oh, well, not all Jews. No, legitimately, the vast majority of Jews are not involved in this. Over 90% of Jews have virtually nothing to do with what goes on in Washington, D.C. The overwhelming majority of Jews do not actually have the financial power to do.
I mean, they call it Jews, but I guess they kind of mean the elites in a way, right? I mean, again, I don't really watch Nick Fuentes or like his content, but I mean, just from like a logical aspect, that sounds more like what they're complaining about.
What JQers are accusing them of doing. Same thing with the media. A lot of times JQers become JQers because they see the level of Jewish representation in the media, and initially, if you don't think about it much, it does kind of raise an eyebrow. And so JQers will often post these very large images that contain a bunch of pictures of people who are in various positions in the media, and how a lot of them are Jewish. And the problem is, you can do this for a lot of other ethnic groups in the United States. For example, the same logic of Jewish representation in the media can also be used against Irish representation in bank ownership.
It's like the spotlight idea. If you shine a light on a specific problem, then it's all you see, basically.
Fun fact, there's actually a very common Irish parody of the JQ, where instead of showing a picture of a bunch of Jewish people in various positions of authority in various organizations, they'll instead show a bunch of Irishmen. And the reason you can make these images is really just simply because there's hundreds of millions of people in the country. Major corporations have thousands of managers, executives, and various directors of whatever. It's not actually as impressive as it seems. And again, the majority of Jews have nothing to do with it. Another weird, also kind of dumb issue with the Jewish question is that a lot of the JQ arguments really do mirror the kind of arguments that you might see from the cult of woke in the left. I don't believe in the term the woke right. I've argued before why it's a bad idea to disconnect the idea of woke.
I mean, it could be like just a sarcastic parody joke in a way. But the problem again is you're gonna get people that just gonna believe it. And then they focus on that a little bit too hard, you know? The potentially joke that you made, and then you suddenly get a bunch of influx of people that actually believe that shit.
From any kind of specific ideology, but it is absolutely true that some elements of far-right ethno-nationalism absolutely do make similarly bad arguments, sort of like lefty Prague woke scolds might make. For example, I've seen Groypers on X or various other discussion forums where their counter-argument is simply, you are Jewish, and that's it. They'll just say that somebody is Jewish, accuse them of being a Jew, and then they'll imply that them being a Jew refutes.
Doesn't that like... Man, they're acting like leftists. Which is really sad to see, oh man.
Their argument. It's like a very weird identity-specific version of the ad hominem fallacy. And as dumb as that is, you can find the woke left doing the same thing with white people. I have absolutely seen people in far left progressive circles like Hassan Abi's viewer base, where they'll make the same argument, but they'll just say, oh, you're white. And that's it. That's their argument. You're white.
You are blank, therefore you're inferior and your opinion is invalid.
Therefore, you're wrong. And it's very silly because a lot of times Groypers are able to understand why this is a very, very, very bad argument when it comes from the woke left, but then they'll turn around and they'll attack a random Jewish person with the same bad argument. Or another thing they'll do is they'll point to Jewish overrepresentation in various positions of authority, be it in corporations or in government, and they'll conclude that that means that the Jews are oppressing white people, which is also kind of silly because it's the same messed up logic that black nationalist woketoids use. They've just swapped the races out. They're replacing whites with Jews and blacks with whites. So for instance, you might see a black nationalist make the argument that, oh,
imagine it's like a giant freaking orb. Imagine they just do that to like point out the inconsistency and lies of the left. But maybe that's like giving them too much credit. I don't think that's probably happening.
There's a lot of white people in Congress, a whole bunch of white men, therefore black people oppressed. And therefore all the whites are involved in a mass global conspiracy to keep the black man down and be oppressing us and stuff. It's exactly the same fantastically ridiculous argument. They're just blaming the Jews instead of blaming the whites. I've even seen some Groypers use the same arguments that woke lefties will use in regards to white privilege, but on Jews. For example, you may have heard when a woke scold is talking about white privilege that, okay, not all white people are in positions of Congress, but all white people benefit from it. You know, that kind of argument. And I've seen Groypers do the same thing. They'll be like, okay, well, not all Jews are in various positions of influence and authority in various organizations in the government and whatnot, but all Jews benefit from it. And the thing is, it's just not really true. For instance, going back on the statistics I shared earlier, there's a good portion of Jews there, around 10%, who's earning less than 30K. If working class Jews are benefiting from it, it's probably safe to say that they're not really benefiting from it that much, at least not in any kind of real meaningful way. And so while I do disagree with the term woke right, it's definitely true that there is a problem of a collectivist right, where they use the same kind of collectivist, ecological, and compositional fallacies, but in favor of white identity while demonizing Jewish identity, instead of other forms of collectivism. Which brings me to kind of a side problem of the Jewish question, which is that perhaps the biggest problem with the JQ is that it's kind of an oversimplification of what's really going on in the world. Because the thing is, a lot of times Groypers or just general JQers, they'll just focus on a problem simply because there's a Jew at the head of the organization or something. Or they'll complain about Jewish donors and complain about APEC.
It's kind of like married to the idea that like all politicians are corrupt, I think. But they kind of like hyper fixate on like the Jewish thing, which is, I think it's gonna, it's like not really working for their interest if they like keep focusing on that.
Or complaining about the amount of money that the American taxpayer is forced to pay, which is then just immediately given to the Israeli government. And on some pedantic level is correct. Yes, the American taxpayer should not be forced to fit the bill for all of Congress's pet projects. But the thing is, Groypers only focus on the ones done by the Jews. And by doing this, they ironically...
That's kind of what I mean. Because you get blindsided by like other stuff that way.
They end up underestimating the amount of corruption that goes on in Washington, because they're weirdly laser focused on the Jews only. For example, the United States in foreign assistance can spend roughly between 1 to 7 billion on Israel in any given year. And yes, that's a lot of money in terms of foreign assistance. But the problem is it's nowhere near the total spending amounts. Like for example, in 2024, total foreign aid was 82.3 billion. And so Israel's only receiving at most 10% of this. And then of course, when you have just kind of general questions of corruption going on in the Senate and the House, etc. in Washington. If you go to Open Secrets...
Honestly, 82 billion is not even that much. Especially if you consider that there's like 8 billion fraud in Minnesota, or whatever the current number is. What? That's like 10% of like the... That's like almost the same amount for Israel. Weird.
They have a bunch of studies on things like the revolving door, dark money, super PACs, and special interest groups. And the thing is, again, yes, there's a little bit of Jewish overrepresentation per population, but in terms of total amount, most of it is actually not Jewish. The vast majority of the problems within the United States government in Washington, D.C. really don't have anything to do with Jews at all. Which now brings me to the second big problem with Groypers finally getting out of the JQ, which is that Groypers are kind of bootlickers. They are correct that both parties are corrupt, but they actually underestimate just how corrupt they are. Most Groypers I've seen, including Nick Fuentes, really only seem to demonstrate a kind of surface level understanding of the corruption that is involved within all the bureaucratic institutions that are driving the West to its doom.
I mean, to be fair, what the fuck can you even do about it anymore? There was, when was it, like a month ago, 2 months ago? Freaking, what's his name? Nick Shirley uncovered the fraud in Minnesota. What happened? Sure, like some of them got like closed and investigated, but Tim Walz is still running around? What? Who is... I want people in jail for this. Point out the corrupt people in the government and put them in jail. That's kind of what I want.
When it comes to intellectual spheres on the right, you can absolutely find very educated right-wing libertarians. You can find very educated NRX. You can find very educated monarchists. But it's very rare that a truly educated person is just an outright Groyper. Because while Groypers do understand the problem with the world, they don't fully understand the extent of what's behind it. I think that kind of going back to the JQ a little bit, I suspect that's the reason why a lot of them latch on to the JQ. The JQ is kind of just an oversimplification as an excuse.
It's like conspiracy theories. You know something's wrong, but you can't put your finger on, so you kind of make something up, maybe? Is that the point?
To not fully understand how to fix something. Because it gives people this kind of idea of, oh, you can just easily fix something by doing this one thing. When in reality, dismantling the bureaucratic state is going to be a lot more complicated than that. And so Groypers then propose these alternative solutions that wouldn't actually be solutions. Like, for example, Christian nationalism.
Honestly, I kind of gave up on it. I kind of gave up on the idea that we can fix government. At this point, we kind of need to, like, you know, rebuild it from the ground up again.
Which that subject is enough for its entire own video on itself. But to be brief, the problem with Christian nationalism is that maybe it might make a few things about society better if they were to gain power, but not really. It would still be subject to the same issues that drive corruption and inefficiency in the current state. In many ways, it just replaces the cult of woke with something else, rather than actually giving people freedom. Which, on that note of freedom, another big issue with the Groypers is what some people call Groyper socialism. One of the things Nick Fuentes recently said was that the left needs to give up open borders and the right needs to give up the free market. Now, I'm not going to go over the economic fallacies that Groypers use against the free market because they're exactly the same fallacies as the left use.
Is that a fair assessment? I feel like the free market has similar problems as the government. Because there's clearly freaking elites working together. You can't tell me that it's a free market if, like, a handful of people are controlling the majority of companies. I don't know.
Actually, the average Groyper has exactly the same economic misunderstandings that your average sort of teenage socialist vooswasher might have. They just have some right-leaning cultural beliefs instead. They just have a pro-white identity rather than a pro-brown identity or something else, which is actually kind of weird because the whole individualism that the free market is kind of based on in many ways stems from WASP culture. And so my only answer to Groypers who think that we need Groyper socialism is to just read basic economics or something. It's the same problem that a lot of the young left has. They just haven't studied economic theory. And again, kind of going back to the...
Yeah, capitalism is fucked, but it's kind of the best we can do, at least as long as we still use money. If we would, like, get rid of money, that would, like... it wouldn't really fix a lot. It would make a lot of things worse in a way, but... I don't know. It's like the best working system we have currently.
JQ, another bad argument that Groypers will use, is an argument very similar to how...
I think the main issue is actually with money, that it became too big. It became too big for its own good. It used to be like all right in like a village or maybe like a region, but if we use it like globally, it kind of becomes really messed up.
Communists will point to an issue and blame that issue on capitalism, when in fact the issue has nothing to do with capitalism. Groypers will do the same thing, where they'll point to an issue with the economy, blame the Jews, and then claim that the economy needs more regulation. Except when you look into those regulations and actually understand them, you'll realize that those regulations are what's causing the problem. For example, if you watch my Refuting BreadTube episode on Second Thought, Groypers will often make the exact same fallacies that Second Thought was guilty of. They'll just add the JQ to it, and that's pretty much it. There's a lot of other small issues with the Groyper.
It's almost like everybody is stupid.
Many of them just kind of silly and not worth covering. But the last one that's worth looking at is the Groypers' solution to freedom of association, which is basically just mass deportations to the point of race war. A meme I've seen posted on image boards quite often. And the problem with this is that race war is an incredibly stupid idea. I mean, just even if we completely ignore the obvious ethical problems with race war, let's just ignore the fact that millions...
Yeah. I mean, he's kind of saying here like that most of them understand this, but they're being ironic. I think this is my point from earlier again. It's like a lot of those things, especially like if you consider that they're coming from 4chan and like, you know, there's always like so many levels of irony and jokes and like inside things and whatever. And it might have started as like an ironic joke or like sarcasm or whatever. And I'm sure like a lot of them still think a lot of those points are ironic and sarcasm, but you're gonna have a subgroup of people that's gonna be the loudest and scream the loudest and basically become the face of the movement that actually do believe in that stuff. It's kind of like similar to like, I don't know, what's a good group, a good comparison? Like furries, I guess. They're kind of like furries. Most furries are just, they're kind of normal. They just like to like, dress up basically. But everybody knows them as like the weird PDF files that wear diapers and want to shit themselves basically. That's the same idea here as well. I'm sure a lot of them still think it's like, haha, it's the Jews, funny joke. But like, there's the subcategory that everybody sees and everybody identifies them with that actually do believe it.
Of innocent people are going to die if that happens, even though that by itself should be a pretty good reason why race war is a really, really bad idea. Another bigger problem with it is that people are likely going to just end up rebelling against it. For instance, just look at the backlash that ICE is already getting for the very small amount of screw-ups that they've had. Admittedly, the mainstream media tends to overemphasize those issues, but
I don't know. Like in every state where they cooperate with ICE, there's not a lot of backlash. It's weirdly enough only in Minnesota, huh? It's almost like it's a coordinated effort to do that.
The point is, it should show you that people are already kind of not interested in this on a mass scale. Doing this on a scale of times 100, which is basically what the Groypers want, would almost certainly just result in mass public backlash. It's also an excuse to not really understand why so many immigrants are coming into Western countries in the first place. And they mostly come for two reasons. One, because we offer them a lot of free stuff, but also because we've passed laws that take away freedom of association. And so they come here and then get preferential treatment through DEI measures, basically getting a full free ride on taxpayer dime. And to any Groypers out there who are watching this video who are not convinced by this, I'll be doing another video later on a newer form of libertarian strategy that will hopefully convince you why right-wing libertarianism, or Hoppians like myself, have a much better, not just a more ethical solution, but solutions that would actually work. Because a lot of the solutions that Groypers offers are solutions that aren't really solutions, they're just backlash to the corruption of the current establishment. And again, yes, young white men growing up in Western countries these days.
What is wrong with white men? The group that we constantly shit on. Oh.
We have every right to be angry at that establishment. But that doesn't mean you should take these silly edgelord positions of screw optics, I'm going in, because a lot of those positions either A, don't work, or B, they're just kind of flat out dumb. So then, what's the conclusion to all this? Well, getting back to the establishment,
I don't know. I mean, on a base level, I agree. We should try doing, things that make sense. But at the same time, if the left is playing unfair, there might not be a chance to win if you play fair either. If you try to play fair, I mean. So you kind of have to play dirty as well to some extent. I don't know. It's really fucked up. It's a bad situation. What to do? I don't know.
I've just kind of gone over what the Groypers are wrong about, it almost seems kind of flabbergasting that the establishment is unable to deal with Groypers. And I think a lot of it can be summarized by that Pierce Morgan debate that recently happened between him and Nick Fuentes. Other people have already done relatively...
Yeah, they did just too easily dismiss them from their bad points. You have to dismantle their good points. It's like with any discussion. You have to... But that's like the main issue with like debating nowadays as well. It's less about trying to argue the points anymore. It's more about optics and making it seem like you won by like overstating too many points, and then you make a clip out of it. Oh, he didn't answer my questions, because you asked like 20 questions and he only answered like 1 or 2 that he could remember after like being barraged with a million questions. Or like, I don't know, if somebody like stutters or makes some verbal mistake or something, that's also instantly freaking clipped. Look how he freaking stumbled in the debate. He was so nervous. It's like the same problem that like Trump had during his like doing his rallies and stuff, right? Like he was there's like this famous clip, right, where they show like legacy media showing him like sweating and being hot and like and then they make freaking headlines about like, look how sweaty he is. He was so nervous. He knows he's wrong. Da, da, da. And then then they play the clip of Trump being like, oh my God, it is like 200 degrees in here. Look at the media. They're going to say I'm nervous.
Decent reviews of this debate, but the TLDR problem is that it shows that the boomers generation doesn't really understand what has happened. And I suspect what has happened is actually just a simple technological one. The creation of the...
No, I think the main issue is they kind of understand, at least on an intellectual level, but their strategies don't work anymore. Because for like the last 5 to 10 years, they just said, oh, you're bad, and that kind of worked, you know. Now it doesn't work anymore, and they're too old and stubborn to change strategies at this point.
Internet has just kind of left the older generations in the dust. And so many of the older generations are still kind of permanently stuck in the origin story of World War II. Whereas online discussions in terms of politics and philosophy have hyper-accelerated us far past that story. And that's a big reason why Piers Morgan just...
They're like too stuck in their mentality and their ideology, maybe?
Couldn't pin Nick Fuentes down. They don't understand that the moralistic arguments of the mid-1900s are dead. They're gone. They're never coming back. They will never, ever work again.
They're gonna come back in like 30 years, I think.
Yeah, that's not to say that
it's a pendulum. It freaking swings around too much.
Moralistic arguments of different types won't work in the future. Of course they will. They always work. Moralistic arguments are absolutely loved by the average person. But the ones that came from the World War II origin story are over, and people need to accept that. And this is especially proven by the fact that all of the attacks on Nick Fuentes have just colossally failed. The strategy of the establishment against Nick Fuentes is mass censorship, mass deplatforming, and mass debanking, and mass...
Just turning him into an underdog, and basically like, especially if you consider that he's like basically saying the thing that a lot of young people kind of identify with, or like, not necessarily identify with, but they can like relate. Because there's finally somebody telling them, yes, your life sucks. Yes, your life sucks, and I see it too. And that's like a deep emotional connection that they're like getting out of this. And when they see that like somebody's being canceled for that, for understanding your problems, then he instantly is an underdog. It's like, oh my god, I tried to censor him. Let's support him even more and harder.
Demonetization of his content. And the arguments they've been giving against the Groypers are, again, almost entirely just moralistic shaming, where they'll say, oh, they're anti-Semitic, therefore they're wrong. But those arguments don't work anymore. You have to actually explain your position. And so what happened is the establishment just ended up making total fools of themselves. Because the thing about censorship that I don't think most people really understand, the main problem with it, is that censorship actually just shields an idea from being challenged. Censorship doesn't work largely for similar reasons behind why prohibition doesn't really work. It just moves the production of the prohibited items underground for all the based algorithms to play with. And in the case of censorship, though, it's actually even worse, because censorship isn't even dealing with a scarce resource like in the case of prohibition. Censorship deals with an idea which can be replicated infinitely. And so you're going to think,
is that accurate? To some extent. Because you can't censor the idea. I guess that's what its point is, like replicatable. Because if you like get rid of Nick Fuentes, it's just gonna be somebody else. Because enough people like believe in it now that it's like, or you know, it's just a power vacuum as well. It's kind of like, oh, Nick Fuentes is gone. This is now my time to shine, and somebody else becomes more popular because they're like in the mainstream area. And ironically enough, they learn from the mistake and be like, all right, I'm not going too hard on this subject because apparently that gets me canceled. But then they, you know, discuss that on their Discord and private chats or whatever.
Think that you can get rid of an idea by simply banning it underground when that doesn't even work with scarce goods? No, of course not. That's obviously not going to work. In fact, what it did instead is it actually strengthened the Groypers' position. Because again, remember, they
proves them right in a way.
And one of the arguments on the Jewish question that I didn't mention when talking about the JQ is that a lot of times JQers will say, oh hey, if the JQ wasn't true, then why did they have the need to ban it? Or they'll say things like, truth does not fear investigation. The thing is, that's actually a somewhat convincing argument. It's not correct, it doesn't prove the JQ is true, but it is true that historically, censorship is often the sword wielded by those who are wrong. If an idea truly is bad, then you should be able to defeat it in the free market of ideas.
True,
it should be not
actually
difficult
true.
whatsoever to do that. And so by banning that idea, you are ironically actually kind of admitting defeat to the idea. It's kind of sad, really, how this is a lesson that humanity has to constantly relearn. And it's especially a problem with the JQ, because...
Why are we still here? We keep repeating the same mistake.
While the Jewish question is ultimately wrong and ultimately unethical, you shouldn't hold the Jews collectively guilty for everything, and they don't secretly own the world.
Yeah, I think they have the wrong target. They need to target the elites. As like, you know, the people in charge, and they try to like change things. Like the tech industry and the elites, I feel like that is more, I think that's more realistic to like who is actually doing all the stuff they think that the Jews are responsible for.
The average Jewish person is, again, just a totally normal person who has done nothing wrong. However, one thing JQers are a bit correct on is, ironically, when it's talking about censorship and certain Jewish and pro-Zionist organizations that perpetuate it. You've got AIPAC, you've got the Zionist Organization of America, you've got the World Jewish Congress, you've got the American Jewish Committee, and of course, let's not forget the ADL, and these are only just a handful. All of these organizations push very heavy pro-Zionist, pro-Israel, and very pro-censorship positions in favor of defending those positions. And it just isn't working. But not only that, but they're also really good examples of...
I mean, that also just plays into their hands, right? Like, it like basically tells the Groypers that like, see, they are Jews. They try to work against us.
It'll pull for we, but not
it's basically
for
like
pushing ultra far right ethno-nationalism for Israel, while pushing ultra far left progressive open society outside of Israel. The truth is that if organizations like this existed for a general European ethnic identity in favor of the white identity diaspora, those organizations would almost certainly be considered white nationalist and would be heavily criticized by the media as hypocritical and subversive. And their answer...
It's so weird that like if you just change the race or ethnic group of anything the left does, it instantly becomes the thing that they freaking constantly argue against.
So far has just been to censor and ban anybody who criticizes them, and it's completely ineffective. Censorship doesn't make you look strong, it makes you look weak, it makes you look incapable of dealing with your opponents. And so for all the shadow banning and demonetization...
I mean, it kind of like, I kind of get it in a way. It's like, if you're saying something and everybody tries to shut you up without actually telling you how you're wrong, it makes them look like they're losing the argument. It's like arguing with your girlfriend. You give her good points and then she just says, oh, you just hate me, I'm going to my mom's. And then you're like, oh, what? That escalated quickly.
And debanking and decredentialing. Here we are in the year 2026, and yet Nick Fuentes is one of the most popular right-wing influencers on the internet. And a big part of that is because the establishment thought that they could just finger wag them out of existence. You can't finger wag them out of existence anymore. The older generations, the ones who are still largely making up Congress, need to acknowledge the fact that they have kind of screwed things for the younger generations. Because as someone who's spent a lot of time within the same culture that birthed the Groyper...
I think their biggest mistake was they used their shame system that they grew up with in an effort to like control society with like the propaganda machine of the legacy media. But you can only be shamed so much until you just don't give a shit anymore. It's like the rebellion teen. If your parents constantly tell you doing something wrong, at some point you just gotta be like, all right, I guess I'm gonna do wrong shit now. If it's like the status quo, I might as well enjoy the status quo instead of like trying to argue against it, which doesn't work.
The thing about them is that a lot of them, they just want a homeland. They just want to live in a society that gives them just the basic amount of human respect and dignity. They want to live in a culture of like-minded individuals to their own, rather than living in a culture that actively...
Yeah, they're being like shunned and shamed. They finally have found like some kind of group that they can belong to, even if that means that they like have to agree to some stupid ideas in the group. But at least they're like part of a group again.
Hates them and actively denies their identity, while hypocritically supporting those very identity politics they are denied for every other group. It comes as no surprise to me that so many Groypers post silly Hyperborean memes sometimes, imagining basically a fantasy homeland for themselves, really just out of a desire to escape from a world that has essentially betrayed them. And so I'll end on that. I'll probably make more videos on the more specific things.
Damn, I kind of like that. It's like really interesting. I see a lot of the points, well, except the bad ones, of course. But like, I can see how like it started out as like jokes and sarcasm and like, you know, multiple levels of 4chan, irony and everything, all of that. The issue is, it became too popular, I think. And if something becomes too popular and you sarcastically joke about things, it kind of becomes like the perpetual lie you always get told, or like, you know, like the propaganda idea, basically. If you're being told this a thing multiple times, all the time, from all directions, at some point you're probably gonna believe it. And I think that's like another issue with it. It's like, at first it was a joke, then the lunatics came, and were actually believing like, oh, it's all the Jews. And then everybody in the Groyper community hears that day in, day out, everybody constantly says it. And at some point, you see like the vague proof that they're showing with like, see? All them Jews in high positions and like all the other things they show that are like vaguely or easily disproven by showing like, all the Irish bankers. But at some point you just, you hear it so often, then you see like some vague proof of it, or like, evidence in quotations, and then you kind of start believing it as well. So I think it's, I don't know, it's kind of like growing in a dangerous direction, I feel like. I think the movement, the community of like the Groypers and Nick Fuentes, they kind of maybe need to like pull the sarcasm and irony back a little bit. Otherwise, it's all they're gonna be at some point. Because it's like the heated argument, the emotions in it, just gonna like make it be 10 times as strong. And then that's like all they're gonna be. Which is sad because it kind of started out as like a nice idea, right? For like, I don't know, disenfranchised white people or like just young people in general to kind of have a community again. Be like, you know what, we aren't bad people. And then turn out and evolve into more bad people. Anyway, if you think the Jews did it, leave a comment. Leave a comment, like, and subscribe. See you next time. Bye bye, bye bye, bye bye.